Welcome to our cybersecurity awareness webinar series. It is a pleasure to have you, especially as you are a woman in cybersecurity. And I'm very sure, myself included, and all the other attendees are going to be going away with real value.
Thank you.
But
Thank you for having me.
I was going through your profile. This is just like a chat before we start proper.
I know,
And
yes.
yeah, I saw that you studied physics. So how did you find your way into cybersecurity?
I actually read engineering physics, but the thing is, my dad has always been in computer. He was a software developer, so I've been around IT like all my life. And I actually wanted to read computer engineering, but ended up in engineering physics. You know, the Nigerian university tales. So
Yes. So how did you start? Did you always know you wanted to be in security, or
No. Security was
IT
like
proper?
a new thing. Yes, mainstream IT. So I was into networking, I was into database, hardware, stuff like that. Had several roles from even teaching. I had a stint at NIT, teaching database administration and networking. So basically, all my postgraduate experiences have always been in IT and tech solutions. So from then on, it was a matter of time because, you know, everybody has this thing about securing their information assets. So that just basically piqued my interest as to, okay, what's this whole security thing about? And I did the whole reading, self-taught, and that's how I got into security.
Wow, interesting. So how has it been for you? You've gotten to being CISO is like the height of being in cybersecurity in Nigeria or even anywhere in the world. So how does it feel to be a CISO and also to be a female? Because I'm sure it must be a bit lonely up there.
Well, I have good people working with me, and for my organization, I happen to be like the first female CISO. So it's a team effort. My team is fantastic, and we've gone through, you know, the whole stages of learning, unlearning. Because when you're a practitioner, they're the, I don't want to use the word shortcut, but they're the things you do to make things work. And then you have to unlearn those practices because they're not necessarily security best practices, you know, things like that. So that's it.
So in terms of security, cybersecurity in Nigeria, where do you think we are? And what do you think we can do better?
Nigeria is doing great. We have lots of individuals who have been interested in cyber, who are on their own and learning. There's so much more that we can do. We have an enabling environment with the whole digital economy rising. I don't know if the pandemic contributed, but I mean, with the whole business processes moving digital, people are aware of how you can lose finances via digital medium. And so everyone's being cyber conscious, whether it's for home or official means. So it's a budding, should I say, sector that is rising very fast with a lot of skilled professionals in the field. So I think there'll be great things to see here in cyber for Nigeria.
You're right. So it is 2 p.m. So as not to take so much of your time, and also the attendees, I would start with the introduction. Then we start. We can't wait for people to join again. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Afiz Adiemo. I'm your host for uh, the webinar. And today we have Mrs. Chineye Chizie. I'm not sure if I got the pronunciation right.
You did.
She
She's a.
is the CISO. Yeah, great. She is the CISO of National Identity Management Commission. And today she's going to be talking about data governance and security. Why is it important for us to, secure our data in this age and time? And, the steps. Yes, you would have a face to the name. Madam, people are requesting you put your video up so they can match.
My video is up. Hello, everyone.
Okay, great. Hi. So today we are going to be talking about data governance and security, and we brought the perfect person to do justice to that. And I'm
Are you sure it's
sure that
perfect?
by the end of this, yes, I'm sure that by the end of this webinar, we all must have learned something new, heard something new, and uh, you know, have a clear idea of how to go about implementing data governance and security in whatever setup we find ourselves. So not to talk too much, let me pass the baton to Mrs. Chineye to also briefly introduce herself and give us a brief is it history of how she got started in cybersecurity, especially in Nigeria, and how she moved from where she started from to becoming a CISO.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chineye Chize. So I've been in IT for a long time. Let's see, just before everyone came on, we were discussing about how I got into IT. It's part of the influence of my dad, who was also in IT, and I've just basically been in the world of IT. All my postgraduate experiences have been about setting up tech solutions for organizations and businesses. So with a background in networking, database, and things like that, you just generally traditionally gravitate towards data security because that's what everybody wants to know about. Is my information safe? With a new threat wave and landscape increasing, so it was natural for me to basically teach myself about security, learn how to implement controls because I've already implemented the solution. So implementing the controls was like a natural process for me. And when the opening came to lead the business continuity team in my organization, I took it and I've learned and grown up to become the CISO here. So that's basically my journey in cyber. So let's talk about data governance. Today is data governance and data security. I understand this session has been ongoing for a long time now. And for me, it would just be for us to talk about how we guide or how we improve our processes. And like they say today and every time now, that data is the new oil. So with data governance, it's just basically a practice of ensuring that organizations have secure concepts or principles or prioritize how their data is managed and manipulated from creation to storage to use, basically who are the people responsible and things like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The overview for us is just talking about the concepts of data governance, which is like definition, talk about the framework, how you can implement. It's a very basic fundamental framework and how it can be adapted to your different organizations. Then we talk about data security because that's one of like the pivotal things with data governance. And we can summarize it by talking about the benefits and drivers for data governance. So in summary, what our outcomes are for today for participants will definitely be about defining data governance, what are the activities that center around human behavior when it comes to data, describing components of the data governance activities, assessing the respective organizational cultures when it comes to data governance maturity models, understanding about data security requirements, and especially change management. So for the baseline of what you have, how then do you incorporate change management and enforce these data governance principles? So those are the things that we're going to be looking at today, and that's what we're hoping everyone takes away with them at the end of this presentation. So data governance is just a set of practices and concepts that prioritize the organization of data. It helps us enforce principles around data management. It helps us improve the effectiveness of organizations. It helps them anchor data governance as like a key mission, like your business process. It also, I think it's kind of like evolutionary. So most companies or most organizations start out with achieving their business goals, and along the line find out that we're growing and we need to be sure that the information we have with us is not lost along the way. It's intact, it's maintaining integrity, the data quality is correct. So when that comes, you then think about data governance. What are those policies? What are those rules around the data that is being held in the different organizations? Then how do we enforce guidelines for people to make proper decisions about those data? So that's data governance in a nutshell. And with that, we can look at a framework. This framework is kind of like, it cuts across for any organization, any sector. It's basically the underlying practice of data governance. It's about a data-driven decision-making process. Everyone within the organization should be information literate. Where is this information? What is the proper taxonomy or nomenclature or classification? There should be an organization council that will define the terms and working groups of how to manage this information, the roles and responsibilities along the information value chain, what are the policies and processes, and then the actual data governance program itself. At what stage are we in the maturity model or matrix? How do we see ourselves in the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, a graduation, and the steps that you need to take to get to that level? What is the strategy that will be used to carry out this data governance? And then reporting and assurance. It's basically about monitoring what has already been implemented. What are the metrics that are there? What are the indicators that this data governance process is performing as it should? And obviously the security falls within the reporting and assurance, because once we have reporting and assurance in place, we are able to actively or effectively govern our data cycle. And let's not forget that at the bottom of it all are the people, the business processes, and whatever technology that we're going to use to implement or manage this data. If you look at the arrows on the side, they just basically signify that from the decision making down to the people or whatever technology, that there should be continuous improvements and change management. So the subsequent slides would then pick up these different pillars I've mentioned here and break it down so you can understand how to implement within your organizations. So if you're looking at the organization council, this is like typical for most organizations. There's usually a board, and then there's like top management, which sits within the, in this case here, the Data Governance Council. Top management has the heads of departments and units, and the chief information officer sits there to direct and drive how the information within the organization is managed. And within the, outside of the governance council, what is key to everyone as it concerns data is the data quality, the master and reference data management. So there's a standard protocol for this set of data that will be defined in the policy. Then there's also the data warehouse and business intelligence management. So we're looking at things like big data now, which is so huge in today's in the world today. And so what can this data that you have, so it's not enough having this data, but what is the value of the data? That's why we have this business intelligence management solutions that help us harness the data that we have, the data architecture management, I'll skip the security, and we'll look at the value and the risk initiatives around projects. Now, when we talk about projects, we're talking about change management. I think the session before now spoke on security in project management. So it's the same thing, feeding off from that session. It's not enough that you have a new project within your organization. You need to also evaluate the risks associated with the project, ensure that the changes within are cut across board, all stakeholders, and is properly documented and appreciated so that all the controls and the policies, whether it is for data governance, whether it is for vulnerability management, cut across within all the projects, okay? So if you notice the ones in red, which is about compliance, security management, data security, and privacy, those are like the three big no-nos, as in every, with the advent of privacy and security requirements, it is now compulsory to comply with the requirements, okay? And in complying with these requirements, you need to have your committees that manage your information security and ensure that even if we're making changes, the requirements, whether it is legal requirements, whether it is a standard requirement, are still maintained, and security and privacy is enforced along the value chain. So this is like a typical organization where you have the chief information officer, you have the different roles. The roles are, I'll speak to the roles later, but this is just like an overview. We have your data stewards. Your data stewards are the people in charge of the actual data maintenance and quality. And you have like a management exec, who is the person responsible for the information. You can also have working groups. When I say working groups, it depends on the subject areas. So your data in different organizations can be for different things. It could be customer data, it could be manufacturing data, telecommunications data, whatever group it is, there should be a data steward and the data custodian. That means the person who is responsible for that data within that cell, or let me say department or unit. And within that group, they are supposed to be able to enforce data governance, okay? Now, on the sides are the things that we measure. So the Governance Council would then provide guidance and initiatives. Okay, the Governance Council provides guidance and initiatives to the working group, and then the working groups in turn are responsible for measuring whatever metrics have been put in place to ensure that the data governance is in compliance. And if there are any issues with what they're measuring, they're supposed to report to the Governance Council, who will take a decision, and then it goes back down as guidance and initiative. So these are the roles across board for data governance, where we have the chief information officer that will drive the whole governance strategy, maintain the high level data model, that's the master data and things like that, that would define the overall process and framework for data governance. Then we have the lead data steward, who is responsible for the data quality and accuracy. So the governing data queries, so when the governing council comes up to say what's happening here, the lead data steward should be able to respond. They're responsible for also analyzing the data within the organization to ensure that there's some level of adherence to the governance framework that has been defined. Obviously, with the lead, there's also the main data steward, like the subject matter expert. It is their domain. They identify what the issues are with this data that has been defined, and then they work across cross-functional groups within the organization to ensure that their domain data is managed as should be defined or as it was defined in the policy, and all parties understand the use of the data that's defined. We also have, pardon me, we have the management exec, whose role is to promote the appropriate data use and data quality. So the governance council has defined this, and management exec sits there like a supervisor and says, this project is going out. What's this? What is the requirement? Why is it not being adhered to, and things like that? And the custodian just basically ensures safe custody, the storage of the data, whether in transport, in storage, and throughout, that the business rules are implemented as defined in the governance framework. And they also ensure that change management practices are applied across board. So the second pillar, or this brings us to the second pillar, third pillar, because we just talked about roles and responsibilities. So the third pillar for the governance framework is about the policies and principles. So policies and principles here looks at the rules that can be measured for each data element within the context of an organization. What is the scope? What is the benefit? What are the data models, the quality, data security, the data lifecycle management? At the end of what period of time can this data be kept? That's the retention policy. Or do we destroy it? How is it destroyed? So basically the policy defines these rules around the data within a business process. It doesn't matter where this data is stored, just define this policy and the stewards will ensure ensure adherence to the defined policy. Principle, as is defined normally, is basically a behavior around this data management, the guidance, the rule or belief that guides the data management behavior or process. And a typical principle should have like the statement, it should have the reason for adopting the principle, it should also contain the implications around that principle, what are the key actions required to enforce this guide, and then reference to either a tool that relates to the principle that needs to be enforced. So that's just like a basic definition of the policies and principle. But in line with that, we have like standard best practice principles for data governance. And for these standard best practices, one of the key things or the key things that should be emphasized across board is consistency of data from the sourcing, the vocabulary, the definitions, classifications, taxonomies, the quality throughout the life cycle. Is it proactively assessed? Is there a standard applied? Even to saving your files, something as simple as how you save your files. I found in sometimes departments and units when they need to retrieve information and they keep wondering, which one is the latest one? There's no version controlling, things like that, okay? The standard or best practice is to have someone accountable for this governance framework within the lifecycle management. Define the roles, align this to your business mission and vision to ensure that the data is treated as the key business asset. Also, the access to this information is relevant to ensure that the information is secure throughout. There should be logs, provide trusted insight. So as an organization, instead of having your data source everywhere, you should have a defined custodian who should be responsible for the accuracy, integrity, and security of that data. Where possible, the data must be simple. It should be clear that at a glance, it is used for the purpose for which it is collected and maintained. The data should be collected only if they have a documented use for it. Again, it's putting in parts of the principles of maintaining privacy, where it says for privacy, you should have a legal basis for the information you collect, and it should be data minimization used for the purpose for which it is collected. So that principle too should be governing your data governance here. It should be readily available to those who have a legitimate business need for that data. The process of the capture, validation, processing, automation, whatever it is, should be entered according to your policy, and it should be updated considering the data elements in the proper standard information system. Where practical data is recorded in auditable and traceable. So we don't want a case where you have an information in the system and someone says that they need information for something, and they need information sorry, pardon me. So they need information for a business need or a business process. And along the line, you find out that this information is not up to date, or it's not stored in the right format, or a system cannot access this information because it was tampered with. So we should have logs across the value chain. If it's a digital information, if it's physical as well, there are ways to enforce access control, physical security controls as well. Okay, so what is key for all of this is that the data should be accurate and it must be presented in the right format. That is basically the effective control or effective measure for data governance, that across board and across the information lifecycle, the data is accurate. So if we're implementing this framework, one of the things that we need to do is review the current state of your maturity model. So what do I mean by this? What is the current level where we are at now in our organization? Is it a casual process of identifying data? Is it just sending information through unofficial means, WhatsApp, Telnet, Telegram, sorry? What are what is the present status of data governance within an organization looking at this framework? Now, if you're able to define that maturity model for your organization, it then is the first step or the easiest step for implementing data governance. With that, you'll be able to have the strategy. In this strategy, we're going to look at your vision and mission statement for your organization, for example. What is the key reason for that business entity to be in existence? And if you have that, it is easy to then classify the data you have within your organization and set up that strategy for governance. Then you can define your scope. I always advise people to start small. Always start small. Identify the different data domains. Start with the data domain that has the best ratio of impact. It's the easiest way. Once you have one that has the highest ratio or the best ratio of impact, it's clearer for others who don't understand what you're talking about to adopt this framework, because they can see the benefits and it then cascades across board to other processes, and your scope can expand. That's why it's a continuously evolving process. So you have from the scope that has been defined, you can then prepare a roadmap from the maturity model I was talking of earlier, and then plan and fund achieving this governance framework. You can also look at things like implementation, because if the scope is defined, it's now easier to design the governance framework. It's easier for you to design the roles according to the existing organization structure. It's easier to deploy within the scope that you have defined. and it's easier to measure the metrics around the data that is being governed. It's easier to monitor and report around it. So we'll look at what the different maturity models are across for any type of organization and any sector. Most times when we look at maturity model, they usually look at 5 levels. In this case, we're looking at an informal setting where there is no attention or limited attention to data governance. It's not formal. There's no process for data governance. Or you can look at level 2, which is like the developing maturity model. So there's some sort of framework in place. The purpose, the principles, roles, and structures have been defined. Awareness has been created. There's also awareness of the type of data quality that should be in place. The procedures have been developed. You have the policies written and the roles are there. So that's like a developing data governance model. And then we then have the adopted and implemented. So it's not enough that we have defined this scope and all the roles and responsibilities attached. We are now adapting it to the normal practice. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at active participation and acceptance from the stakeholders, from the structure that you have defined. What are people doing? Is there a buy-in? What are the issues that have been encountered? Do we proactively look at the data validation methods that are in place within our organization? What are these data assets that have been identified and evaluated? What is the result? So there's now a feedback. Remember that framework diagram I had earlier where it was the cycle? So from the governing council, it's now being implemented, or it's being shown down to the working groups, and the working groups are reporting their metrics back to the governing council. Okay, so the policies are communicated throughout the life cycle of data and the data dictionaries within that organization. The roles and responsibilities are defined. There's a chain of command. If there are any queries, there are people to contact. There are champions of the data governance that can direct people on the path of the governance framework. And then we get to level 4. It is then managed and repeatable. So it's not like a fluke. We did it once and we cannot do it again. We've repeated it across different sectors. Things like data is key, is critical for decision making. Pardon me. So it's critical for decision making. We're looking at assets that are within the governance program. There's support, there's endorsement, participation, expectation for data quality is high because it's not just lying on an individual. Repeated people within the cycle have taken ownership of this framework and are able to apply it to the individual business processes, okay? So the standards are completely documented, and it's not enough to document this thing. Those documentations are also reviewed on a regular basis. So if we don't review your documentation, it's difficult to manage the governance framework, in the sense that you could have had something theoretical based on something that someone read, and practically we've not been able to enforce that. So in the review, there should be a workaround or documented principles of how this data governance policy can be maintained, okay? So there's ownership here within the roles and responsibilities now. So it's not a case where it was loosely defined. Now people own up to their responsibilities and perform valuation of their data as clearly defined within the policies. And the final level of maturity is looking at an optimized version of this data governance. It's completely integrated into every process within the organization. It has proven over time its effectiveness. And so business leaders, heads of departments, units would rather go with what has been defined and repeated over time. Okay, with this level of maturity, you find that data quality efforts are regular. It's easy. There are tools in place to pick out what's happening, where there's an exception. But before data is put in the data entry source, there are validation of the information to ensure accuracy. Every employee within the organization is knowledgeable about what the data policies and standards of that organization is about. They understand the framework that the organization is committed to and have also owned up their responsibilities within that framework and are accountable. So this is the maturity model I was referring to when I said earlier that to implement the program, you need to understand your current state. So if you know your current state, you then plan towards achieving an optimized governance maturity model state. And that's what we've basically summarized. And the last pillar for the framework is referring to the reporting and assurance. Here we're looking at the performance measurements, how they're reviewed across the different domains and dimensions of data governance. Are we talking about things about the organization structure? Within the organization structure, are you measuring who has been assigned a data governance role? How effectively is that person performing that role that has been assigned? If we're looking at the workflow and decision-making process of a business process, we measuring your workflow queues, your decisions, are they resolved? Are there issues? Is there outstanding queries that
Hi, Chineye. Can you hear me?
need to be dealt with? Basically, hello?
Yes, yes. I can hear you now.
Yeah,
You went off for a while.
I think I went off. I hope I didn't go far. Did everybody hear the reporting and assurance bit?
No, I think you can repeat that.
Okay, so who is this person? Hello? Hello?
Hello, yes. I can hear
Hello?
you. We can hear
Okay.
you.
All right. Pardon me. So I think it's a bit fluctuation in the network. So the reporting and assurance bit I said is about the performance measurements across the different domains and dimensions of data governance within the organization. When we're looking at domains like the organization and structure of that business entity or enterprise, we're looking at the roles of data governance within that business entity. How is the role assigned? Are there standards and guidelines? Is there training and mentoring? Is the information within this process passed on as should? We're looking at things like the workflow decision for business processes. How do we measure the decisions across workflow queues, decisions around issues that arise? What are the outstanding queries? How are they resolved? And is there like a knowledge base for people to follow, to repeat these measurements across and ensure effectiveness of the governance? We're looking at, for the data itself, measuring things like the accuracy of the data that has been collected, the integrity of the data, consistency of that data, and its completeness, as well as the validity. So when we're looking at accuracy measurement, you can measure things like percentage of records deemed valid Are they, how much information you've collected are correct or not? And we look at things like the integrity, is it a tamper-proof process along your information life cycle? We look at, for credibility indicators, you can use a percentage of aggregations within your tolerance limit defined in your governance framework policy. If we're looking at, for data, if you're looking at how current that information is within the organization, you measure things like timeliness and percentage of records received on time, basically. And for coverage, how complete is that information? What indicators can we use to measure completeness? Percentage of mandatory fields. So you know when you have a form and you ask people to fill them, how much of those mandatory fields were collected? How much of the optional fields were supplied? What is the percentage of expected records received? Things like that give you an indication of your data governance process, okay? And then we look at things like the uniqueness of the data itself. And that brings us to change management, or the continuous improvement process. So no organization exists and stays as is. Along the line, you find out that for the value that you're providing for your customers or your value chain, you find that there's need to improve your information that you have within. And as you think of improving, it talks about new projects that come on to enhance that business service that you're giving. Part of that process and part of that project should still go through change management to help us ensure that the governance principles and policies that have been defined are maintained. The same thing for your security metrics. So the data security here refers to how or what controls and measures you have in place to meet the security objective. Basic security objective speaks to confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data across the life cycle. So we're looking at from the source, whether it is at collection, data use, data storage, that whole security along the information lifecycle stage. And that brings us to the actual data security itself. What is data security? It talks about the technology and processes designed to protect your systems, networks, and from unauthorized access and vulnerabilities. That's what data security is in a nutshell. And we need to maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability. There's also accountability as well. That means if something was tampered with, is there like a log to see who accessed what, when, and where? And what we always advise is that in data governance, it is important to protect your information resource across the information life cycle. It is important that all your security mechanisms are in place. Start always at the data definition phase. In today's world, the threat landscape is increasing. There are a myriad of threats. I've only just simulated or put a few down on this slide. We have different kinds of malware. There's state cyber welfare. There are threats to your voice IP systems and mobile devices, botnets everywhere. All of these cyber crimes are evolving. There's like a dark web society for evolving cybercrime economies there, thriving. And what is the main aim of all these threats? It's all driven by data. And when all of these threats are available, what is key for every organization is to ensure that there is no loss of information, that their information is not corrupted. We don't have unauthorized modifications or unauthorized disclosures, okay? And how do we protect from these possible threats? The first things first is what the organization's security policy is. You must have a security policy or security strategy and framework. From that policy, it then defines how you classify your data, sensitive data across the information lifecycle, control the physical access to your information resource store, implement access control. I keep saying this, but it's not just enough to have your username and password. We need to start implementing multi-factor authentication as well and log all the accesses. That log gives us the accountability aspect of security. We advise to use firewalls for public-facing wide area network connections. Within your organization, deploy virtual local area networks and access control lists to isolate your information assets. So you know the principle of least privilege. Information is shared on a need-to-know basis. Encrypt your sensitive data. Data masking if the information needs to be shared outside. And use validation and verification. Even check digit to check your data integrity. Always ensure that there's a backup and archive of the information that you have within your organization. Antivirus and malicious software protection should be on all systems. So what are the drivers for data governance? We know that data governance can either be reactive, it can be preemptive, and it can be proactive. So what are the key drivers for us? And most organizations have high volume of data. So if you have like a reactive governance framework or a reactive governance approach to data governance, you would then be seeking efforts to respond to each pain. This pain has happened around this data, you're reacting to it. You've suffered a breach, for example. What are the measures that we're putting in place to fix that? And we don't encourage reactive governance. Then there's also the preemptive. The preemptive here is looking at organizations facing major changes or threats. What have you put in place to design to ward off significant issues that could affect the success of that organization? That is being preemptive. So it is usually driven by compliance to regulatory frameworks, basically compliance needs. But one of the things that we need to be aware that could work for data governance, but you need to understand that if your motivation for data governance is driven by compliance to requirements, you would not achieve the effectiveness of data governance. Okay, so we always advise that it is good to apply proactive governance approach for data governance. The drivers, again, are high volume of data, information is now pervasive, we have different data management platforms, whether it's your ERP solution, your CRM, all of these platforms exist that use or consume the data that we have within the organizations. And we need to ensure accuracy of business intelligence. There's now need for responsibility for organizations to be responsible on how they store, they manage, and protect the data that they have within the organizations. Business change is no longer optional, like I mentioned earlier. Because you want to give an added value, it is inevitable. Mergers and acquisitions, again, always drive data governance. So you have this organization that had implemented data governance and they need to merge or acquire another company. You find that the market forces and technological advances around that force data governance to be implemented. And then there's also the cloud. The migration to the cloud has necessitated the need for data governance. Now, if we implement this data governance framework, we're sure to reap the benefits of data consistency, reliability, repeatability. We're sure to have various analytical activities running concurrently and effectively. It helps us solve issues around analysis, reporting, and give clarity of the data that has been collected. So in summary, I think I'm running out of time. Data governance is basically a practice and it is used wider as part of a wider business strategy. Business-centric frameworks can facilitate data governance. Organizational roles are critical to the success of data governance. And data governance can never be a one-size-fits-all approach. It is a measure for us all to implement and ensure effective practices within our organization. So I think I've come to the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, yes. So, as I was saying, a big thank you to you. That was very, very insightful, and I've penciled down a lot of things. But the questions are coming in fast. I don't know if I should go with mine first or I should just read from what we have already for Q&A. So
No problem.
The first question is from an anonymous attendee. How does data localization impact on our discussion today to ensure effective practices and compliance?
Okay. Can you give me like 3-4 questions so that we are still in line with the time?
Okay, so the next question is
data, if you can, how does data localization
impact on our discussion today to ensure effective practices and compliance?
Okay. And the next one?
The next question is from Mr. Olubowale Songo Sonya. What is one of the major issues, concerns you have with regards to data governance? What can be done better? So the third question is going to be from me, and that is, why is data governance, or why is it very important for us to secure our data, especially at this point we are with the pandemic and increase in the amount of cyber attacks we have?
Thank you very much. So this data localization query is one of the key things around data protection as it is today. Let me start with how does it impact the discussion, which was the first question. You need to know where your data is. And today in the world, there are several regulations and frameworks around data. And so if you do not know where your information is, for example, let me take a case of the cloud. Information stores are stored in different countries, and especially in Europe, there are GDPR requirements for data protection. Your data governance framework helps you identify the sources of your information, your data, where it is it stored, how is it managed, what controls or compliance requirements am I required to maintain across where they are stored on different platforms. So data localization plays a key role, because you cannot say you're enforcing a governance framework without understanding where your data is stored, okay? The other one is about the major issue that concerns data governance today and what can be done better. I think one of the main challenges about data governance is the fact that a lot of people have in some sort of way been practicing some kind of data governance and feel that there's no need to formalize it until there's a breach. And then we then react. So I think that is the key issue. A second issue around that is the technical skills. I find that there are a lot of people within organizations who have these skills and interest, but somehow their organizations are not tapping into that skill set that is already available. So for me, those are the main concerns around it. If we trivialize the governance framework or the governance requirements, and then we have this breach of information, there's like a backlog of work and a lot of consultancies that need to go around implementing that. And the last one is similar. It says, why is it important to secure the data? We cannot overemphasize how data is now the new oil today. If you have competitors within a particular sector, for example, imagine if your trade secret falls into the wrong hands. What then happens to your business that you're providing value to a populace? It's best to have your security from the design stage. Understand your data sources, understand the controls that you have in place, and implement them at every turn. If possible, use tools to enforce this. It's not about being manual. Okay, we need to automate the process as well as have people check that these policies and guidelines are enforced. I see another one that says from Adeni Yakoni, says, despite data governance practices, there are so many breaches here and there. What protection do we have as CISOs and CIOs? What can I say? Like I mentioned earlier, the threat landscape is evolving. So you can't just sit and say that we've put controls in place for these available threats and not continuously research and think about the information that you have within your organizations and how to best secure it or practice or implement governance principles, data governance principles. Okay, these breaches, if we witness the likes of the SolarWind breach that happened a few weeks back, it's even your supply chain. It's across every facet of your organization. It's not just about the information you have within. So we cannot just sit down and say it's been implemented. It's a continuous process. This is why I mentioned change management. It's evolving, okay? And unfortunately, when you take 10 steps, the bad guys are like gazillion steps ahead of you looking for that thing because that data is lucrative for them in their economy. So I think I've answered them. Are there any more questions? Hello? Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. The next question is from Treasure, and I think she's thinking out loud. I think context is key to the practice of data governance. That is what
Yes.
she's sensing.
Context is really key. That's why I mentioned earlier when I said one size cannot fit all. Context is key to the practice of data governance. As individuals within your different enterprises, you understand your business process, and it is important for you to contextualize that process and implement the framework as it affects that organization.
Okay, so the next question is from Mr. Olubawale again. As a CISO, and based on the new norm, depends on definition. Will you see your budget increasing or decreasing?
Is that personal to me or my projects? Across board, let me be general here. I find that CISOs are seeing their budgets increase because there's now a blur between the physical perimeter and your digital perimeter. So there are so many requirements for protecting your information with the remote workforce. So I see for some organizations that yes, the budgets are increasing. And I see that a lot of chief executives are now paying attention to security. So I'm not sure if I can say that for this pandemic case and as it relates to cyber, that has been a plus. Yes.
Okay, so we have another question, and it is, how can you streamline a career in cybersecurity as the Nigerian requirements / role doesn't permit that.
I don't understand what they mean by the rule doesn't permit it to. It's in
Okay,
cyber, there's so many different rules, or is there like another context to that? Yes, the slides
I,
will also be available.
yes, I think what the person is trying to ask is, if, for example, you want to be a pen tester or ethical hacker, but
Mm.
currently in Nigeria, I think you need to have 3, 4 different skills before you're even given an opportunity. So he or she is trying to ask that what can be done for you to focus on your own area as a pen tester or ethical hacker.
I'm not sure about the what you've just said about not focusing. I know organizations that require just a pen tester and they get that. I do understand, however, that in some organizations they make somebody do like a one cap fits all. You're the security man, you're supposed to be the expert, not just pen testing. Do everything from pen testing to compliance to control implementation and things like that. Ideally, for a career in cybersecurity, it should be driven by passion. That's what I always tell people. It should be what you're comfortable with. And I find that the easiest um, level on the ladder for people to get into cyber is via pen testing, developing skills in that area, becoming ethical hackers, and gradually moving on to architecture. It could be security engineers. We have many security operations managers across. So there are different roles within cyber. It just depends on what is available. And I know that for smaller businesses, they make people do one size fits all. But when you go into bigger organizations, it's kind of like streamlined based on the need.
Okay, so I'm sure you've answered that question from that person. So we have from Mr. Kunle Ogunde, can data governance cost be too much for its value?
And I always say for any solution at all, what is the value that you are hoping to achieve? Because you need to look at the return on the investment. I don't think data governance cost can be too much for its value. Again, if we go back to the question on context, it is the context within that organization. It's just the same way when you are implementing a security control. Some controls and vendors can try to market so many control measures for you to implement. You find that for some of them, it is more than the actual risk of that information. Yes, it's effective within another organization, but in your organization, you find that, well, we have compensating controls around this, and we don't need to make that investment on this extra thing. So for data governance costs, again, it is about context. That is why when I talked about the program implementation, I said you need to evaluate your current state first. What are you hoping to achieve? Where are we at as an organization? And what do we expect to see once we have implemented this? What is the value? If down the line your governing council decides that you're not achieving value, then obviously you are not supposed to have implemented that framework in the first place. But I haven't seen any organization that has not achieved value from implementing data governance.
Okay, so the last question I think is, within your organization, what 2 key factors will keep you awake at night with regards to data?
Okay, so here, what are the factors that keep you awake with regards data? If we look at things like, I have a long list, but let's see which ones. We look at things like your data corruption, because people always think of the threats from outside. We don't consider the threats from within. How your information is stored, how data corruption within your organization is something that can cause nightmares. it depends on how large it is. It takes a team of people to go through the incident and revisit and then restore information. You really don't want to go through that bottleneck. It's better to have this governance to ensure that you achieve that. Another factor that you can think of again is the loss, which is from the threats outside as well. What happens? What happens to the additional information that you have for a particular business process when it's lost? How do you restore again? So those are things, those are factors that can keep you awake. Okay, sorry, I've stayed the only two. I've kept two: corruption and data loss. Yes, to everyone. Yes, the slides will be available to our fees. I think he has emails of everybody and it will be shared. Yes, please.
Yes, it will. Any more questions before we round up? Okay, I don't think there's any.
Thank you, Anonymous. My dad will be excited to hear this.
I saw that. I wanted that to come last. Okay, so
yeah.
Once again, thank you so much, madam, for the wonderful presentation. I'm sure we've all enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it, and with the questions that have come in, people also paid attention and they've taken one or two things away from it. On behalf of Commercial Limited, we say a big thank you for taking our time and also for presenting this wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So all the attendees, thank you for taking our time to join us again. This is probably the 20th episode from 2020. So thank you so much for your time. And we hope you've been getting value for your time. And also to the sponsors of the webinar, Commercial Limited, I say a big thank you. Commercial Limited is an IT solutions provider into hardware, software, cybersecurity, and cloud. So please feel free to reach out to me, to reach out to us for all your IT needs, IT, cybersecurity, cloud needs. So thank you also to Commercial Limited. We have a couple of very exciting projects coming up. I'm sure we are going to be sharing them via email later. So this is just to round up. Any parting words from Madam?
Hey, I hope we took something away from today's seminar and we'll go back to our different organizations and implement something. So yes, thank you for listening, and the slides will be shared later. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. God bless you.
All right.
And
goodbye. Bye, all. Stay safe.
Hello.